Recently, I've been preparing for investment banking interviews, and I've been going through a lot of different guides with a lot of different questions. So I'm going to make a series going over some of the more difficult and interesting questions that I find. Today, I'm going to talk about what a hostile takeover is and some of the things that companies do to defend against them. Some of these are pretty absurd and funny, so that's why I wanted to make the first video about this topic. But first, let's actually talk about what a hostile takeover is. Companies generally engage in mergers and acquisitions to grow really fast. Now, there are times that companies are not willing to sell, and so a buyer will come in guns blazing and try to take the company by force. This normally happens with public companies, and the hostile buyer can take two paths. First, he can make a tender offer and just offer shareholders like you and me a price for their shares. Another way they can take over the firm is by convincing the shareholders to vote against the current board and management team. Now, a recent relevant example of this was Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter, and Twitter actually used one of the techniques that we'll talk about next. First, we're going to talk about some preventative defense techniques. The first one being a poison pill. You might have heard this because Twitter actually used this against Elon Musk back when he was trying to acquire Twitter. There's many types of poison pills, but the gist of it is that a company might have a clause that says that if an investor passes a specific threshold of ownership, let's say 20%, then every other shareholder can get another share of the company for free or for a big discount. So let's say that a company has 10 shares. If one investor buys 2 shares, that means that he's going to own 20% of the company and he's going to activate the poison pill, in which case the other 8 shareholders would get 1 additional share, causing the total shares to go up from 10 to 18, and the investor's ownership percentage would go down to just 11%. In this type of poison pill, the shares were automatically issued for free. This is also called a dead hand defense. Next up, we have the golden parachute. Generally, the goal of a hostile takeover is to fire away the existing board of directors and establish a new one to go in a different direction. Now, with a golden parachute, you make that extremely hard because it's a clause that says that if the company is acquired and if the management team is fired, each person of the management team will get an unreasonable bonus. They generally try to make this bonus as absurd as possible to scare away hostile takeover buyers. An example of this is the CEO of HP, Meg Whitman. She had a clause in her contract that she was to receive almost $100 million if the company was acquired and another $50 million if she was fired. Now imagine if the rest of the board or management team received similar packages. It would start to make the deal very, very unattractive. At this point, the numbers might no longer work out and you might pass on the deal. Next up, we have the crown jewel defense. A company generally has assets, and these assets are the ones that produce money. For example, OpenAI, its crown jewel, its main asset that produces a lot of money is ChatGPT and the whole AI model behind it. The crown jewel defense is an agreement that says that if a company is taken over, all the crown jewels of the company will be sold off, meaning all the important assets of the company will be sold off. A simpler example would be to think of the Krusty Krab and imagine that Plankton was trying to take it over. If Mr. Krabs had established an agreement that said that if the Krusty Krab was taken over, the trade secret of the Krabby Patty would be sold, SpongeBob, the famous cook, would leave the company, and the Krusty Krab with its brand and its fame would be sold over to a competitor. At that point, Plankton might have to reconsider the takeover because it would make no sense because what he wants wouldn't be there after he acquired the company. Now, these were some of the preventative measures that you can take to ensure that no one tries to hostile take over your company. Now, we're going to go over some of the active measures that you use once someone has already begun to try the hostile takeover. So the first two I'll talk about is the white knight defense and the white squire defense. So once the rumblings start that someone might try to hostile take over a company, that company might turn around and try to find another buyer, a strategic buyer, to acquire the firm instead. This is better because this would be a friendly buyer that is likely to work with the management team to move forward. The difference between the white knight and the white squire defense is that in the white knight defense, the good buyer takes over the whole company, whereas in the white squire defense, the strategic buyer only takes over the necessary portion of the company company needed to fend off the hostile buyer. So to keep going with the Krusty Krab example, imagine that, again, Plankton is trying to acquire the Krusty Krab. So Mr. Krabs reaches out to Sandy Cheeks and they make a deal so that she can acquire the company first. So in a White Knight defense, Sandy Cheeks would acquire all of the Krusty Krab, and in a White Squire defense, Sandy would acquire the necessary portion of the Krusty Krab to scare away Plankton. Next up, we have the Pac-Man Defense, and this defense is pretty much what the name implies. If a company is being taken over, the company being taken over will turn around and simply say, you know what, instead of you taking us over, we are going to take you over. The goal is not to acquire the hostile takeover buyer. The goal is just to scare them off enough so they stop buying shares or they sell their existing position and they go away. So again, going back to our Krusty Krab example, instead of Plankton buying the Krusty Krab, Mr. Krabs is going to say, you know what, you're not going to buy me, I'm going to buy the chum bucket. Even though it sucks and I have no interest, but I just need to scare you away enough for you to not buy the Krusty Krab. So these are some of the more interesting ones that I found in my interview studying. But if you know any funny ones as well, let me know. If you want to see more content related to finance interviews, investment banking interviews, subscribe. I'll probably be making more of these videos with like random questions that I think are interesting or complicated and try to walk through them. We release videos every Wednesday, so subscribe and we'll see you next week. Peace.